Archangel Chronicles 3, Chapter 4, Truth, by Raymond Colati, copyright 2026, all rights reserved.
Morning mist lay on Jordan's shore, where silent waters gently rolled. John stood waiting through the dawn for one foretold in days of old. Brigomarus watched in wonder as the prophets searched the sky. Something stirred beyond the desert, though no one yet could tell them why. Drink the living water, let every burden fall. The Lamb has crossed the river, the Father's voice has called. Though kings may build their palaces and proud men wear the crown, truth will flow forever, though earthly thrones fall down.
Morning came pale and cold over the Jordan. Mist clung low upon the water, drifting like breath across the reeds, while the first light of dawn crept slowly over the eastern ridges. The wilderness remained hushed in that strange hour before full sunshine, even when birds seemed reluctant to break the silence. Brigomarus was already awake. He stood apart from the sleeping encampment upon a ridge overlooking the valley below, his heavy cloak wrapped tightly against the chill. Beneath him, small fires smoldered among the stones where John's followers had rested through the night. Shapes moved quietly in the half-light. Men gathered water. Women rekindled cooking fires. Somewhere below, a child cried softly before being soothed back into silence. But John himself stood alone at the river's edge. The prophet had slept little. Brigomarus had watched him through the final watches of the night, pacing slowly beside the Jordan beneath the stars, pausing often to gaze southward into the wilderness beyond the distant hills, as though waiting. Brigomarus descended carefully toward the riverbank. The cold water whispered over the stones. John stood knee-deep in the shallows, his rough garments darkened by the current. His head remained bowed. For a long time neither man spoke. Then Brigomarus said quietly, "Teacher, you have not rested." John lifted his eyes slightly but did not turn. "No. There is trouble upon your spirit." A faint smile touched John's weathered face. Not trouble, Brigomarus waited, but expectation. Brigomarus looked toward the awakening horizon. Pale gold now touched the wilderness ridges beyond the Jordan. Of what? John's gaze remained fixed southward. Of whom? Something in the prophet's voice caused Brigomarus to fall silent. The crowds began arriving shortly after sunrise. They came in greater numbers than before. Pilgrims from Judea, shepherds from the hills, traders from Jericho, Pharisees in fine robes whispering among themselves with suspicious eyes, auxiliary soldiers in chainmail armor and oval shields lingered uneasily at the fringes of the multitude, pretending indifference while listening intently to every word. The air itself seemed taut with anticipation. John entered the river again as the people gathered along the banks. "Repent!" his voice rang out across the water and the stones. "Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight the path before him." The crowd pressed closer. "The kingdom approaches even now. Do not harden your hearts." The man descended trembling into the river. John immersed him beneath the current and raised him again. The man emerged weeping openly. Others followed. But Brigomarus noticed something strange. John's eyes continually searched the southern road. Again and again, even while speaking, the prophet's gaze lifted beyond the crowds toward the distant wilderness, as though he were listening for footsteps unheard by other men. The sun climbed higher. The river glimmered bronze beneath the morning light, and then suddenly John fell silent. The change passed through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Conversations faded. Movements ceased. John was staring beyond them all. Brigomarus turned instinctively. At first he saw only the dusty path winding down from the southern hills. Then a solitary figure appeared, a man walking alone. No escort accompanied him, nor disciples, nor animals. There was no display of rank or learning. His garments were plain and travel-stained from the road. Dust clung to the hem of his robe and to the leather straps upon his sandals. Yet as he approached, something impossible to name seemed to move before him, like stillness entering noise. The people nearest the path stepped aside unconsciously. No command was given, no word spoken, and still the crowd parted. Brigomarus felt his chest tighten. He had stood before emperors' envoys, before generals and kings seated beneath gold and scarlet banners. He knew how power announced itself to the world. This was nothing like that, and yet it was greater. The man continued forward with calm, unhurried steps until he reached the riverbank. At last he stood before John. Silence settled completely over the Jordan, and even the wind seemed to pause among the reeds. John stared at him with an expression Brigomarus had never seen before. There was wonder and recognition, and something very close to reverence. The man looked at John quietly. Then he stepped into the water, the current moving around his legs as he approached. John swallowed visibly. "I know you," the prophet said softly. The man's expression remained gentle. "And yet I come." John shook his head faintly, almost in disbelief. "No," his voice lowered further. "It is I who should come to you." Murmurs spread uneasily through the crowd. Brigomarus felt the hairs rise upon his arms. The stranger spoke again. "Let it be so now." His voice was unlike John's. There was no fire or thunder, yet every word carried a strange authority, quiet and immovable as the deep places in the earth. "For this is the way by which righteousness is fulfilled," he said. John closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the fierce wilderness prophet seemed suddenly humbled before something infinitely greater than himself. Slowly he nodded. "So be it." The two men waded deep into the Jordan until the water reached their waists. Brigomarus found himself leaning forward unconsciously, unable to look away. John placed his rough hands upon the stranger's shoulders. For one suspended moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single image, the prophet and unknown travelers standing together beneath the open heavens while the river moved around them. John lowered him beneath the water, and the Jordan closed over him. Then silence, a silence so deep Brigomarus could hear only the beating of his own heart. The man rose again from the river, and the heavens opened. Brigomarus gasped sharply. The sky above Jordan did not merely brighten, it parted, as though a veil unseen since the foundation of the world had suddenly been drawn aside. The light descended. This was not sunlight. but something pure, something alive, terrible, and beautiful beyond words. The crowd cried out in fear and wonder. Some fell to their knees immediately. Others shielded their faces. A woman nearby began weeping uncontrollably, and within the descending, pulsing radiance, Brigomarus perceived a form, not fully seen, but unmistakably present. It moved downward, and with perfect stillness, like a dove descending upon calm waters, and rested upon the man standing in the river. Then came the voice, not merely heard, but felt from deep within his soul. It passed through Brigomarus like thunder through the bones of the earth itself. "This is my beloved son," the words filled heaven and wilderness alike. "In him I am well pleased." Brigomarus' knees buckled. He caught himself upon his staff before falling fully into the shallows. He was not ready for this. No man or woman born on earth was ready for this. His breath came unevenly. An overwhelming sense of awe descended upon him. It was holy, but terrifying. Around him, people wept openly, or bowed with faces pressed against the earth. Yet Brigomarus could not lower his gaze. He stared at the man in the river, the man who now stood beneath the fading radiance with water running from his garments and hair, utterly calm, utterly unshaken, as though heaven itself had merely revealed what had always been true. John stepped backward slowly, and for the first time since Brigomarus had known him, the prophet seemed to have no words. Brigomarus understood why. Everything John had proclaimed beside this river, every warning, every baptism, every cry in the wilderness, had pointed here to him. The man turned quietly towards the wilderness beyond the Jordan, not triumphantly and not seeking attention. He simply turned as though the path before them had already been chosen, and began walking toward the barren hills alone. No one followed. Brigomarus watched him go. The old warrior felt something shifting within him with immense and terrible clarity. The years of blood, Bethlehem, Mara's mercy, the long silence beside Lake Mariotis, the river, John's voice, his own surrender beneath these waters. All of it had led to this moment and to this man. Brigomarus lowered his head slowly. His voice, when it finally came, was scarcely above a whisper. "The Anointed One." John heard him. The prophet's eyes remained fixed upon the distant figure walking into the wilderness. "Yes, here is the Lamb of God," John said quietly. And for the first time since Brigomarus had known him, there was a peace in the voice of the wilderness. They stood for a long time until the man passed out of sight. John came out of the water and grasped Brigomarus by the forearms. And now the time has come for me to diminish. He firmly gripped Brigomarus and drew him closer, and looked earnestly into his eyes, his own brimming with tears. "The time is very close, my friend, when you must leave me and follow him." The seasons turned slowly over the wilderness of Judea. The sharp chill of spring mornings softened beneath the weight of summer heat. The Jordan shrank back within its banks, reeds whispering in the hot wind, while dragonflies skimmed above the water. Then came the long gold light of autumn, when the hills behind the river burned copper beneath the setting sun, and the nights carried the first breath of coming cold. Through it all, Brigomarus remained beside John the Baptist. Brigomarus carried no sword. His hands, once hardened by reins and spear hafts, now hauled water, raised rough shelters, tended fires, guided the sick, and steadied the old as they descended into the river. He slept beneath the open sky with the others, wrapped in wool against the night wind, and woke each dawn to the sound of John praying among the stones. Crowds came endlessly, farmers from Judea, shepherds from the hills, fishermen from Galilee, beggars, zealots, women carrying children, Pharisees with narrowed eyes and guarded questions, Roman auxiliaries who came secretly after dusk so they would not be seen. And always John cried out beside the waters, "Turn your hearts toward God, bear fruits worthy of repentance. The axe is already laid at the root of the trees." Sometimes Brigomarus watched as the people emerged from the river weeping, and he wondered how one solitary man with long, disheveled hair, clothed in camel hair, could shake souls more deeply than armies or kings. One evening near Beth Abara, as the last light faded crimson across the Jordan, two young men approached the fire where Brigomarus sat mending a sandal strap. The first was broad-shouldered and weathered by the sea, with thoughtful eyes and a heavy Galilean accent. The other, younger and quieter, watched everything with alert intensity. "We seek the baptizer," the elder said. "He is praying," Brigomarus replied. "He will return presently." The younger man glanced towards the darkening river. "We heard him once before in Galilee," he said softly. "We could not forget it." Brigomarus studied them. "Your names?" "I am Andrew," the elder said. "This is my brother Simon." At the mention of the name, Brigomarus gave a faint smile. Brothers often walk dangerous roads together. Simon shrugged, usually because one of them has a foolish idea. Andrew laughed quietly. Brigomarus found himself liking them immediately. John returned not long afterward, emerging from the darkness beyond the firelight, dust clinging to his feet. His eyes seemed distant, as though he had been listening to voices carried upon the wind. The brothers rose at once. John regarded them silently. Then he nodded. "You have come." Andrew lowered his head. "Rabbi, we wish to learn." John's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then learn this first. No man belongs to me." He pointed towards the southern horizon. "Another is coming. I am only the voice that goes before him." Brigomarus noticed the strange look that passed across John's face when he said it, a longing mixed with sorrow. As the weeks passed, the company wandered through the wilderness towns and villages east of the Jordan. They preached among shepherd camps and date groves, in market roads and besides wells. Everywhere the crowds grew larger, and everywhere the enemies grew more numerous. Word spread northward into Galilee and southward into Jerusalem. Priests denounced John openly now. Herod Antipas heard the rumors reaching even his courts beyond the Dead Sea. Still, John did not relent. One afternoon, beneath a hard, white sky, they climbed the barren ridges overlooking the eastern wilderness. The air itself seemed lifeless there. The earth was cracked and yellow, broken by cliffs, and plunged toward the salt waters of the Dead Sea. Then Brigomarus saw it. Far ahead, upon a black height, stood the fortress of Machaerus. Its walls rose from the mountain like something carved from the bones of the earth itself, with grim towers of basalt and pale stone overlooking the desolation below. Even from a distance, it radiated menace. Several of John's followers slowed uneasily. Andrew muttered, "Herod's fortress." John stopped walking. The wind stirred his rough cloak. For a long moment he stared at Machaerus without speaking. Brigomarus stepped beside him. "What troubles you?" John's eyes never left the fortress. "There are places," he said quietly, "where evil gathers weight like storm clouds." The others fell silent. A raven circled high above the cliffs. John drew a long breath. "The Tetrarch fears truth more than swords," he murmured, "and fearful men become cruel." Brigomarus felt an old soldier's instinct awaken inside him. He studied the fortress walls, remembering the narrow approaching roads, the high killing ridges surrounding it. This was a trap. The thought came unbidden. John turned at last toward his followers. There was no fear in his face, only certainty. "The time given to me grows short," he said. The autumn winds moved across the wilderness, carrying with it the bitter scent of salt and distant rain. And somewhere, far below, beyond the cliffs and wasteland, the waters of the Dead Sea lay dark and motionless beneath the dying light. The road beneath the fortress of Machaerus was crowded long before sunrise. Pilgrims and peasants had gathered among the rocks and scrub brush below the great citadel, whispering beneath the cold desert wind. Some had come to hear John the Baptist preach. Others came simply because rumors had spread throughout Perea that the Tetrarch himself might appear. Above them, the fortress of Machaerus loomed against the pale morning sky. Brigomarus stood watch near the edge of the gathering, his old soldier's instincts restless. He did not trust this place. The cliffs were too narrow, the approaches too exposed. Trained archers could slaughter a crowd from the heights if ordered. John was unconcerned. He stood upon a broad stone overlooking the people, his rough camel hair cloak stirring in the wind as he spoke with the force of a desert storm. "Do not say within yourselves, 'We are children of Abraham.' God can raise children to Abraham from these very stones." The crowd murmured uneasily. A woman wept openly. A shepherd lowered his head in shame. Then came the sound of trumpets. They were not the silver horns of the temple, but the sharp ceremonial blasts of a royal procession. The crowd turned. Descending the winding road from the fortress came mounted guards in polished armor, followed by servants bearing standards embroidered with the sigil of the Tetrarch. And at their center rode Herod Antipas. Brigomarus stiffened instantly. Antipas was older now than the last time Brigomarus had stood near a Herodian ruler. His beard was carefully trimmed, his robes elegant but restrained. He carried himself not like a warrior, but like a man accustomed to courts, negotiations, and subtle dangers. Herod Antipas was not a man who inspired immediate fear in the manner of conquerors or generals. There was nothing physically imposing about him. He lacked the broad-shouldered menace of soldiers, the towering dignity of kings born to ancient thrones, or the hard simplicity of Roman commanders. Yet there was something unmistakably dangerous about him all the same, a danger concealed beneath refinement, calculation, and charm. He was a man shaped by courts rather than battlefields. Brigomarus observed that in age Antipas had passed beyond youth, but not yet into oldness, somewhere in the middle years where vigor begins to compete with weariness. His face bore the marks of luxury and anxiety in equal measure. The flesh about his jaw had softened slightly with time, though care had been taken to preserve an appearance of elegance. His beard was meticulously trimmed, streaked here and there with threads of iron gray that caught the desert light. His skin carried the warm bronze tones of the Levant, though years beneath shaded colonnades and palace awnings had spared him the rough weathering common among soldiers or laborers. His eyes were his most striking feature. Dark and intelligent, they rarely rested long in one place. They moved constantly, measuring people, weighing reactions, searching for hidden meanings beneath spoken words. At times, they glittered with wit and curiosity. At others, they became clouded by suspicion so suddenly that no one understood how many men at his court must have feared a careless phrase spoken in the wrong moment. There was exhaustion in those eyes, too. Not the exhaustion of physical labor, but of careless political balancing. Rome above him, rival claimants around him, ambitious courtiers whispering in every corridor, priests judging him, zealots hating him, and the shadow of his father looming over all. Yet he was unmistakably his father's son, not in grandeur or genius, but in restlessness. Like Herod the Great before him, Antipas possessed the nervous awareness of a man who knew power could vanish overnight. He had inherited neither a secure throne nor a stable kingdom, only fragments of a divided realm held together by Roman favor and political caution. Every smile concealed calculation, and every alliance felt temporary. Even in the stillness, he seemed inwardly moving. His clothing reflected the contradiction within him. He dressed neither as a Roman nor fully as a traditional Jewish ruler, but somewhere uneasily between worlds. His robes were of fine, dyed fabric, deep burgundy, muted indigo, desert cream, and edged subtly with embroidery imported from Syria or Alexandria. Gold adorned him lightly but deliberately. A signet ring, worked clasps at the shoulders, a narrow chain at the neck, enough to proclaim authority without provoking accusations of excess from his subjects. He smelled faintly of cedar oil and imported incense. His voice was softer than many expected, cultured, controlled. He rarely needed to shout, for he had long mastered the art of making others lean closer to hear him. When amused, his speech carried a quick cleverness, almost urbane in its irony, but beneath the polished, lived volatility, irritation could flash suddenly through him like lightning behind clouds, vanishing almost as quickly. Women, wine, architecture, philosophy, politics, yes, he loved all these things sincerely. Antipas fancied himself civilized, enlightened, a ruler of sophistication rather than brutality. He built cities and patronized culture. He preferred negotiation to bloodshed, and yet blood followed him nonetheless. There were rumors when his cultivated manner cracked, revealing the frightened insecurity beneath. In those moments, one glimpsed the tragic core of the man. He desperately wished to be admired, perhaps even respected, yet lacked the moral courage necessary to become worthy of either. This is what made him vulnerable to stronger personalities and power like Rome and his wife Herodias. Most dangerously of all, he was vulnerable to men like John the Baptist, men who spoke truths Antipas secretly recognized but lacked the strength to obey. In another life, perhaps, He might have become a patron of learning, a peaceful administrator, even a thoughtful philosopher prince. But he had been born a Herod, and among the Herods, fear always devoured wisdom in the end. Beside him rode several Pharisees in dark robes, and a cluster of scribes carrying scroll cases beneath their arms. The atmosphere changed at once. Fear spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Yet John did not move. Herod Antipas dismounted slowly at the foot of the rise and looked up at the baptizer. For a long moment neither man spoke. Brigomarus sensed immediately that this was no ordinary encounter. There was curiosity in Antipas's gaze, perhaps even admiration, but also something deeper and more dangerous. Fascination, the kind men feel when standing near fire. One of the Pharisees stepped forward first. "So," he said coldly, "this is the wilderness prophet who troubles Judea." John's eyes shifted toward him. "I trouble only those who profit from darkness." The Pharisee flushed angrily, but Antipas lifted a hand, silencing him. "No," Antipas said softly. "Let him speak." His eyes returned to John. "I've heard many things about you, baptizer." "And I of you, Tetrarch." A flicker of amusement crossed Antipas's face. "They say you fear no man." John descended from the stone and came closer until only a few paces separated them. "I fear God." The desert wind swept between them. Antipas studied him intently. "You are unlike the zealots," he said. "They whisper of knives and revolt, yet you carry no weapon." John spread his hands. "What sword cuts deeper than truth?" Several scribes exchanged uneasy glances. Antipas smiled faintly. "You speak like the prophets of old." "I speak because Israel has forgotten." The Tetrarch's expression darkened slightly. "And what is it Israel has forgotten?" John's voice rang across the hillside. He looked up to the sky and raised his arms. "Justice!" He clapped his hands. "Mercy!" He clapped again. "Faithfulness!" He lowered his arms and leveled a withering gaze at Antipas. "You build palaces while peasants starve. You adorn yourselves in luxury while widows beg beside your roads." The Pharisees bristled immediately. One snapped, "You dare lecture rulers appointed by Rome?" John turned away sharply toward him. "Rome appoints many things. God appoints few." A murmur swept through the crowd. Brigomarus saw several of Antipas's guards tense their grips upon their spears, but Antipas himself only watched John more intently, almost hungrily. "You are dangerous," the Tetrarch said quietly. John met his gaze without hesitation. "No, truth is dangerous." For the first time, silence fell completely, and even the wind seemed to fade. Antipas climbed the last few steps toward John until they stood nearly face to face. "You know," Antipas said softly, "I could imprison you now." Brigomarus instinctively shifted his stance. Several followers of John moved uneasily, yet the baptizer did not blink. "You could," John replied, "but you did not come here to silence me." Antipas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why then?" John studied him with an intensity that made even Brigomarus uncomfortable. because your soul is restless." The words struck harder than a blow. One of the scribes scoffed nervously, but Antipas raised his hand again. The tetrarch's face had changed. For a moment, the polished ruler vanished, and Brigomarus glimpsed a weary, uncertain man beneath the silk and authority. Antipas looked away towards the wilderness beyond the Jordan. "I hear you speak of the coming of the kingdom of God," he said at last. "Tell me, prophet, what becomes of kings in such a kingdom?" John answered immediately, "The proud are brought low." The words hung like drawn steel in the air. A long silence followed. Then Antipas gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You truly do not fear anything." John's expression softened slightly. "I fear for you." Something flickered across Antipas's face then. Irritation, fascination, and perhaps even shame. Far above them, upon the heights of Machaerus, blackbirds circled against the brightening sky. Antipas noticed them too. For the first time, Brigomarus saw uncertainty enter the tetrarch's eyes. At last, Antipas stepped backward. "We shall speak again, baptizer." John said nothing. The ruler turned and began walking back towards his escort. The Pharisees hurried after him at once, whispering furiously among themselves. But before mounting his horse, Antipas looked back one final time. John stood still, unmoving upon the hillside, framed by the wilderness wind like one of the ancient prophets returned from the dead. Brigomarus, watching the tetrarch's troubled expression, understood something terrible. Herod Antipas had come expecting to hear a madman. Instead, he had encountered a man he could neither dismiss nor forget. Several days later, Brigomarus stood in the market at Machaerus. The marketplace seethed beneath the white blaze of afternoon. Traders shouted over one another beneath awnings dyed red and indigo. Bronze bowls flashed in the sun. Goats cried from wicker pens. Dust swirled upward beneath the feet of pilgrims, soldiers, merchants, and beggars gathered from every quarter of Perea. John stood above the restless tide of voices. He preached from the worn steps beside the public well, clothed in rough camel hair, darkened with sweat and desert dust. His beard moved in the wind like the mane of some wild horse. His eyes burned with the terrible clarity of a man who feared nothing because he already belonged to God. "Repent," he thundered, his voice carrying above the market noise. "The axe is laid into the root of the trees. Every kingdom raised upon wickedness shall be cut down." Some listened in awe. Others muttered uneasily. Roman auxiliaries watched from the shade with the narrowed eyes. Brigomarus stood near the edge of the crowd, beside several of John's followers. He had seen kings, generals, priests, and murderers, yet there was still something in the Baptist that unsettled him, a man stripped bare of all compromise. Then the crowd began to part, not suddenly, but instinctively, like grass bending before the approach of a serpent. Herodias entered the marketplace, surrounded by attendants and guards in the black and gold livery of Antipas. Conversation faltered as she passed. Men lowered their eyes without understanding why. Women watched her with guarded expressions, measuring themselves against her beauty and finding themselves diminished. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though the world itself existed to frame her passage. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was not soft. It possessed the polished danger of a jeweled blade. Her dark hair flowed beneath a thin Phoenician veil threaded with gold. Emeralds rested at her throat like drops of poisoned spring water. Her face was exquisitely formed, almost unnaturally composed, untouched by uncertainty or shame. Her lips held the faintest suggestion of amusement, as though every soul around her were transparent to her. But it was her eyes that held men, cold, amber-brown beneath long black lashes, patient eyes, observing eyes, the eyes of a creature that studied weakness the way a hawk studied movement in the grass. Brigomarus knew this kind of person. Herodias did not merely desire power, she reshaped it. She entered the fears and appetites of others and quietly arranged them into weapons. Where Antipas vacillated, she resolved. Where he feared consequence, she calculated opportunity. She understood desire not as passion, but as leverage. And because she never questioned herself, she could move through cruelty without resistance from her own conscience. There was something serpent-like in her beauty, not ugliness, but something colder, a perfect stillness beneath which danger coiled unseen. Her attendants halted behind her. The guards spread outward. The marketplace fell silent. John stopped preaching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Herodias smiled faintly. "So," she said, her voice smooth as perfumed oil, "the desert prophet speaks again against his rulers." John descended one step from the well. "The rulers of Israel are not above the law of God." A flicker passed through the crowd. Herodias tilted her head slightly, studying him as one might examine an animal that had unexpectedly spoken. "You speak boldly for a man clothed in skins. And you adorn yourself richly for a woman drowning in sin." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the marketplace. The guards stiffened, but Herodias did not react. That was the frightening thing about her. Rage never mastered her face. Emotion in her was bridled, disciplined, concealed behind calculation. "You condemn what you do not understand," she said calmly. "I understand enough," John replied. "You abandoned your husband. You entered your brother's house. You corrupted the tetrarch and turned his court into a place of vanity and appetite." Herodias' eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Antipas's soldiers shifted uneasily. Some glanced toward the crowd, others toward Herodias herself. John stepped closer. "It is not lawful for him to have you." The words struck the square like stones hurled against bronze. A tremor moved through the people. Some lowered their heads immediately, afraid even to appear listening. Herodias regarded John in silence. Then slowly, she smiled again. But Brigomarus suddenly understood something terrible. She was no longer merely angry. She was plotting the next steps. "You think yourself fearless," Herodias said quietly, "but every man may be broken." John's expression did not change. "I am already broken," he answered, "broken open before God." For the first time, Something sharp flashed behind Herodias's composure. Not wounded pride, but hatred, pure and cold, because she had found no purchase in him, no vanity to flatter, no appetite to tempt, no fear to exploit. Such a man was intolerable to her. "You speak of judgment," she said softly. "Be careful the wilderness has not filled your head with visions." John lifted one weathered hand and pointed directly at her. "The jackals of the desert are more honest than you." The crowd recoiled. Brigomarus felt his pulse hammering. Herodias stared at the prophet for one long second. The entire marketplace seemed suspended around her silence. Then she turned, not hurriedly or angrily, but with perfect control. Her robes whispered over the stone as she departed through the parted crowd, her attendants following behind her like shadows. Brigomarus saw her face for one brief instant before the veil concealed it again, and realized with sudden certainty that John the Baptist had just signed his own death sentence. Night gathered slowly over Machaerus. The fortress palace of Herod Antipas clung to the heights above the Dead Sea, like a predatory bird upon a black stone. Torches burned along the walls. Beyond the parapets, the wilderness stretched into vast folds of purple shadow, empty and ancient beneath the fading light. Inside the Tetrarch's private chambers, perfumed lamps flickered against painted walls of crimson and gold. Bronze censers exhaled streams of myrrh and cinnamon. Musicians played faintly somewhere deeper within the palace, their melodies drifting like ghosts through the corridors. Antipas stood near a carved cedar table strewn with petitions and unopened scrolls. He wore a loose robe of Tyrian purple, belted carelessly at the waist, and there was weariness in him tonight. There was no weakness, exactly, but division, the kind of inward fracture that comes when a man desires virtue but lacks the courage to choose it. Herodias entered without announcement. She moved through the chamber like dark silk, poured into human form. Jewels glimmered softly at her wrists and throat. Her face remained perfectly composed, but Antipas immediately recognized a cold brightness in her eyes. Someone had offended her. "The prophet insulted me publicly," she said. Antipas exhaled slowly. "I heard. He called me corrupt before peasants and beggars." "He calls many corrupt, but not many sit beside a throne." Herodias crossed the chamber with measured calm. She poured wine into a silver cup. Through her movements carried the restrained violence of someone mastering anger through discipline. "This man grows dangerous." Antipas said nothing. Herodias turned toward him. "He stirs the crowds wherever he walks. Already they whisper that he speaks with the authority of Elijah." "He is a holy man," Antipas answered quietly. "Even now, I am not certain he speaks falsely." Herodias's gaze sharpened. "There," she said softly, "that is your weakness." Antipas frowned. "You fear him because he does not fear you," she said. "He speaks what he believes," replied Antipas. "He speaks what humiliates you," she hissed. The Tetrarch looked away. Outside, wind moved faintly against the shutters. Herodias approached him slowly, her voice lowering into something gentler, more intimate. "You are ruler of Galilee and Perea, yet this wild man from the desert stands before the crowds and mocks your authority openly. Each day he remains free, you appear smaller beside him." Antipas rubbed his brow. "The people revere him. The people revere spectacle." Herodias stepped closer still. "Arrest him quietly. Bring him beneath the fortress. Let the desert swallow his memory." Antipas looked sharply at her. "And then?" Herodias held his gaze without blinking. "There are garrets in every dungeon." The silence that followed seemed suddenly heavy. Antipas turned away. "No," he said at last, "not that." Herodias watched him carefully. She understood him too well to press directly now. Antipas could be driven, but never cornered. His vanity required the illusion of moral choice. So instead, she changed shape entirely. Her voice softened. "Come," she murmured. "You burden yourself too greatly tonight." She touched his arm lightly and guided him towards the balcony doors. Antipas allowed himself to be led, and the doors opened into the warm desert air. Below them, upon a lower rooftop terrace lit by hanging lanterns, servants had spread carpets and embroidered with Nabatean patterns of crimson and gold. A traveling hamper lay open at the center beside the folded silks and opened jewelry cases, and there, kneeling upon the carpet, was a young woman. An older attendant stood behind her, holding a painted sunshade, though the sun itself had already vanished, more from habit than necessity. The girl did not know she was being watched. She was perhaps 16 or 17, poised at that fleeting threshold where youth begins to sharpen into dangerous beauty. Her dark hair fell in long waves down her back, loosely gathered with tiny golden clasps that caught the lamplight whenever she moved. She wore a gown of pale blue linen, so fine it seemed woven from the water itself. The fabric clung lightly at the waist with a narrow belt of gold links and fell loose at the sleeves, exposing slender, bronze-toned arms adorned with delicate bracelets. Her movements possessed the unconscious grace of a gazelle, fluid, unsteadied, and alive. She bent over the open hamper, examining its contents with quiet delight. Veils embroidered with silver thread spilled across the carpet beside the belt set with the Carolinian stones and the chains of worked gold from Alexandria and Damascus. She lifted one translucent veil and held it against herself experimentally before laughing softly at her own reflection in a polished bronze mirror. Then she reached for a pendant, and as she leaned forward, the lantern light traced the elegant line of her neck and shoulders. Antipas watched the effortlessly flexibility with which she moved, bending and straightening again as lightly as a reed stirred by water. There was innocence in her motion still, but also the first awakening awareness of beauty, a dangerous combination. She rose suddenly to her feet and turned, testing the fall of the veil across her hair. The fabric drifted around her like smoke. Antipas stared, completely captivated. "Who is that?" he asked quietly. Herodias smiled. She moved beside him until her shoulder almost touched his. "That," she said softly, "is someone whom you shall meet." Below them, The girl removed the veil and laughed again as the older woman adjusted a golden pendant against her throat. Herodias' eyes remained upon Antipas, not the girl. "She has come," Herodias whispered, "to entertain you at your birthday feast." Antipas was transfixed, but somewhere beneath the rising heat of desire came the first faint stirring of unease. Music for Chapter 4. Living Water, lyrics by Raymond Collotti, voices and music by Marika A.I. The following from Epidemic Sound: Celestial Breath by Palace on Wheels, Reflection by David Edward, Immovable Mountain by Issacher Kageyama, Kyrie Eleison by Silver Maple, Gaze of Wisdom by Rand Aldo, Potential Redemption by Max Anson, In the Gloom by Michael Rothberg, Daybreak by Max Anson, Waiting for the Call by Max Anson, Chant of the Moors by Flo, A Hero Will Know Them by Bonnie Grace, Consumed by Darkness by Christopher Moe Ditlevson, Heartbeating Trills by Martin Beckelvold. Archangel Chronicles 3, Chapter 4, Truth. Copyright 2026 by Raymond Collotti. All rights reserved.
Heaven burst with light. The Spirit came descending like a dove so pure and bright. This is my beloved Son. The Father's voice declared. Every soul fell down in trembling, for the living God was there. Drink the living water. Let every burden fall. The Lamb has crossed the river. The Father's voice has called. Though kings may build their palaces and proud men wear the crown, truth will flow forever. Though earthly thrones fall down. The seasons cross the wilderness, yet John would never cease. Oh, calling hearts to righteousness, to mercy, truth, and peace. Andrew came as Simon too, to hear the prophets cry. Follow not the voice before you, the greater one draws nigh. Then rose the walls of my Jerusalem, dark upon the desert stone. John beheld the waiting fortress and knew his days were known. Still he walked with fearless footsteps, though the shadow gathered near. For servants of the kingdom do not measure life by fear. And shepherds came clothed in splendor, seeking wisdom, seeking peace. John proclaimed the truth before him, for the danger would increase. Justice, mercy, faith, thunder, no disguise could hide the stain. For a kingdom built on falsehood cannot follow where the Lamb has wandered. He is Lord and King.